appointment. I also teach in Women and Gender Studies. I teach our BiPanPoly Lives course and the Trans and Non-Binary Lives course also. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and they, them, and theirs. What else do what do I identify? I use the term queer probably most. And then probably more specifically, I like polysexual, though I use bisexual sometimes, and gender probably agender, though recently I've just kind of talked about it might be just do not disturb is my gender.
Okay, I think I'm next. Can everyone hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. My name is Haley Olson. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am an undergrad student here at the University of Oshkosh. I am majoring in social work, and I would say that I identify as bisexual.
Wonderful. Alicia?
Yeah, so my name's Alicia Obermeyer, very recent May UW Oshkosh alumni, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I identify as queer and also pansexual.
And I'm Victor Raymond. I've been out to speak at UW Oshkosh before. Let's see here. I have a PhD in sociology from Iowa State University, and I identify as, let's see here, bisexual and two-spirit because I'm also a member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe in South Dakota. And yeah, queer is a term I also identify with, although I think one of the reasons why I continue to identify as bisexual is because it gets discriminated against a lot, and I think it's important to own the radicalness of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And what are your pronouns, Victor?
Oh, she, let's see, he, him, they, theirs. Yeah.
Cool. Wonderful. All right, and John has not joined us, so we will go ahead with our first question. I wanted to start the conversation by focusing on identities before we focus on activism. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the identity term you use for your sexuality and romantic orientation, what it means to you, why you use it. And Haley, why don't you start us out this time?
So I identify as bisexual, as I stated, and I would say for me, it really hits home because it is an identity that I can use to just feel free to love whoever I want. And I think it's another good term to like acknowledge that I could be in a relationship with anyone that I'm attracted to, no matter who they are, where they come from. And I don't know, it means a lot to me because for a while when I was little, I always felt this way, but I could never put like a label to it. I just thought I was like quote unquote weird. And after finding out like more about like LGBTQ communities, I really came to fall in love with it. And I just say it makes me just feel free to have that identity.
Mm-hmm.
Alicia?
Yeah, so for me, it's been quite a journey finding an identity. When I originally came out, I identified as lesbian, and kind of as I've grown and to further accept myself and work on both like internalized biphobia and other different systematic or systemic oppressions, I've really come to love the word queer, both with it meaning one, both, and neither all simultaneously, but also an umbrella label for me personally is something that really helps me feel free and unconstrained. And I also am happy to identify as pansexual or bisexual because those are such powerful words, and am very lucky and happy to feel part of those communities as well. But yeah, overall, queer is just my happy, friendly, everyday term.
I mentioned a moment ago about, bisexuality. Bisexual is a identity that gets discriminated against, and along with a lot of others. I mean, we can look at pansexual, and also, I mean, there's a whole host of other identities that are only now getting more accepted in what we think of the big LGBTQ plus umbrella. And for me, I came out when I was 17, and I was lucky that I had a family that accepted me. But it was a little interesting being an undergrad when bisexual was not a word that anybody really knew very well. And so for me, yeah, I want to echo what Haley and Alicia have said already. I mean, for me, it's a matter of freedom. I've always felt like I've had a range of attractions, and and there have been times when it has mattered. I used to think that gender was a big component of it. Now I'm probably more in the mindset is that gender isn't necessarily a relevant factor to my attractions. And I'd rather have that seen than not. So.
Okay. This is an interesting question for me because I feel in some ways like things are a little bit in flux with me in terms of what labels I prefer. I started identifying first as bisexual because that was the word I knew. That was the word that I understood the best of all of the terms. I shifted to queer because it helped to explain a little bit more of my experience beyond just sexuality, and a little bit more of my experience, for example, as an activist, my experience as within my gender, stuff like that. So I think the term queer also gave me the freedom to stop explaining it to people. I want to say it did, but then I always am on panels explaining it to people, which is kind of funny. I like to do that. I like to educate, so it's a good thing. But I think it's more about not explaining it when I don't want to. So yeah, I also sometimes will use bisexual for the same reason, because it's understood easily. So when I'm talking with people who don't really know our community, if I say bisexual, it's less likely to get misunderstood. I would say that I use the term. I started using the term polysexual because I think it's actually more accurate for how I have experienced attraction in my life. If I were to describe how I experience my attraction, I would tell you that it changes over time, and that it fluctuates, that it flows. It's not always, I like the Robin Oakes definition of bisexual, the not necessarily to the same degree, that I can't think of the whole definition off the top of my head, but it's, attracted to more than one gender, not all at the same time, and not necessarily to the same degree. And I think that definition really fits well for me. But it's definitely that piece of, like right now I might have more attraction to a particular gender, and there might be a gender that I'm like completely not attracted to at all at this moment that later will be like my number one, like that just happens for me, and I don't really question it a lot. I just go with it. But I think polysexual kind of spoke to the fact that I don't really experience attraction to all genders, and gender often is something that draws me in, like someone's gender in a particular direction will draw me to them at a particular time, and then other times, like, not so much. So it's kind of a term that's specific for me, but I've kind of moved away from using it just because it's not understood as much. I think I only say it when I'm kind of educating. And lately I've felt a little bit more like I just want to explain less, even though I probably just had the longest explanation. Go figure, right? Mm-hmm.
So we're never just one identity, right? And so I wondered if you could talk about your understanding of yourself as a BiPanPoly queer person, with an understanding of how it intersects with other identities that you have. Maybe discussing one or two to talk about. Alicia, could you start us out? Is your mic on? Alicia?
Hi, hello. Is it better now?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think
There,
I
we
clicked
can
it
hear you now.
twice. Okay. Got too excited. Just kept clicking. But yeah, so for myself, I think that what it comes down to is fluidity and being queer. It's like I can wake up and feel completely different than I did the day before. And overall, it's just a play on masculinity, femininity, and the in-between and outsides of the non-binary. So for identity, for me, I always felt really extreme in whatever I felt for a very long time. It was like, well, I only like boys. And then I was like, I never liked boys. I only like girls. And then I was like, oh, well, I'm kind of interested in, wait, they don't associate themselves with a gender. And I'm like, well, what? Like, if they don't associate themselves with a label, then what am I? Like, how do I label myself? And so I think, just one of those things is kind of just coming to terms that it's okay to be fluid and every day be ever changing and accept and love yourself for that. And so with being, I feel like I'm going off on a tangent, but just basically the freedom and the openness within the BiPanPoly queer community is its own little subcategory of just understanding that we can't choose who we're attracted to, and what we love and who we love and what we want to do each day, but also understanding the fluidity and with that the freedom of that. Yeah.
So do you see that same type of fluidity happening in any of your other identities? And how do your other identities influence your being queer? Are you still with us, Alicia? Oh,
A little bit of.
okay. We can come back to you for that. Okay. Victor, do you want to address that?
Sure. Yeah, one of the things that I knew from when I was very small was that I was different from the other kids, and it was something that, when I started elementary school, kindergarten, I began to see this difference and understand it, and that difference was that I was biracial, and being Native American and white, and finding out that my family had been for generations, biracial, multiracial, was kind of an interesting thing to discover. Playing cops and robbers was pretty straightforward, but cowboys and Indians was a little bit more fraught. But I had that through my family, and it actually helped me understand what it meant to be bisexual when I got to my teenage years, And throughout this time, I found myself, when I was a kid, well, I'm attracted to girls and I'm attracted to boys, and I can talk about one of these, and I probably ought not to talk about the other one, right? And because I've got light skin privilege, people tend to assume I'm kind of white, which means that people say things around me that they would never say if they knew that I was Native, right? It's meant to me now that being biracial helped me understand what it meant to be bisexual, but being bisexual now helps me understand what it means to be biracial, because I find that I'm coming out all the time, not just about my sexuality and my attractions, but also about my racial identity and how I associate with others. So it's, to me, these are all part of who I am. And I'm glad I had both of these things, because they both help me understand each one of them.
Wonderful. Amy?
Oh, it's my turn? Okay. I was thinking I was later in the list. I don't know where I want to start. I mean, I could talk a little bit about my race as well. I identify as white. I also have a Shawnee ancestry, so I kind of fall in a somewhat similar space to Victor, but because it's less a part of my, has been less a part of my understanding of myself because of the way it wasn't talked about in my family, it's been something that I've come to a little later in life. And I think that I resonate with that, never quite fitting into like one box camp, and kind of looking at how do I explain this, and when do I explain this, and how do I want to talk about this, and do I want to talk about this, and so that really resonates with me in a big way. But I think that the part that felt easy is within my spiritual community, which is an Indigenous spiritual community. I definitely found an understanding of sexuality that didn't exist in like white communities. And it was almost like it just didn't need to be explained quite as much. And it just was like people could see me in ways that I don't ever really feel seen in other spaces. And it really crossed over into a lot of pieces around gender roles too. And I think like in that space, my gender is much better understood. And so like I don't get seen as perhaps like the other women, and that's just okay. Yeah, so I guess, and I think like definitely coming out as queer has helped me to explore my gender. So I'm kind of going in a circle now, like each of these informs the other, but I definitely felt that queerness gave me language to understand gender that I didn't have before, and in ways that I first kind of rejected gender that was pushed towards me, I later, I just kind of accepted it when I got really pushed into it, and then later kind of started to say, wait a minute here, like that maybe wasn't quite who I feel I am in the world. And I'm still figuring that piece out in a big way. But yeah, I was telling my friend Admiral yesterday that I think my gender right now is just do not disturb, which means like I feel pretty okay just not having gender like slapped on me. And so I just would rather just not have it applied to me. And I don't really want to like have to talk about why I don't want people to apply it to me. I just want it to happen, in some ways. And so it feels very much like I have a big do not disturb sign on me. Like, don't call me a lady, please. Like, just say like, hey, you, or something. I don't know. Thank you.
Haley?
Yeah. I have something to add later, but that's okay. We don't need to go into it now. Sorry.
Haley?
Um, One of the identities that I think really influences a lot about how I like portray myself as bisexual, I would say is age, because I am only in my 20s, and a lot of people my age or like older than me, when they find out that I've already like selected what I identify as like sexually, they just label me as like, oh, you'll find out in the future. Like, you're not actually that. And I feel like that's one thing that really just makes me like wanna just like curl up into a ball and just hide it and be like, so I'm just not gonna label myself if people are gonna be that way. But I also do think it's really nice too, because I'm at the beginning stages of like my journey and like exploring my sexuality. So I do like that aspect of it because I can feel like I'm being seen in the right group of people. Um, I feel like another thing that kind of relates to this is religion. I feel like so my family is like pretty religious, and I feel like there's some religions that don't really accept like bi, poly, just anything like that. So I feel like that's another thing that keeps me from being who I really am to like some of my family members, and I feel like that's really hard. So I just think that my identities sometimes will make my sexual identity just not be seen.
Victor, you wanted to add?
Oh, just one thing that I'm glad Amni brought up, the spiritual side of things, having grown up in the Indian community and the Native community, identifying as two-spirit has been something that's been also something I have explored over time. And that's been important to me for many of the same reasons that Amni has brought up. And that's been helpful. And I mean, when Haley was talking about not getting accepted, yeah, there are some times when I've not felt accepted, mostly because a lot of mainstream society wants to put us into this gender binary box, fit into one of these two boxes. And I'm just kind of like, I'm not sure. In fact, actually, I know my tribe doesn't think of it that way. So, yeah. Anyway, that was kind of what I was
Mhm.
wanting to get at.
Yeah. Mhm.
Alicia, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, sorry about the technical difficulties. The smoke ruins my Wi-Fi. I'm in Oregon, so we have wildfires here going on. But yeah,
Mhm.
so that's actually, I didn't know that there were two other natives in this little panel here, so that's very cool. Because I was going to add that, so I'm also Native American, and um, my mom has the blood quantum, but my dad was adopted by Lakota. And so I think learning from him the difference between what you're born as and who you choose to be really shape my queer identity every day. Because you can be one thing, what you're supposed to be, what you're taught to be, um, what your blood says that you are, and you can completely disregard it, and it doesn't have to be a part of you. Or you can adopt things that feel close to you, close to your heart. Like when my dad is, with other Native people in our community or on the Menominee Reservation, it's like, like for a long time he had like his own identity problem, and he's like, well, I'm not Indian, and they'd be like, ah, like, yes you are.
Mhm.
There's more than just the blood quantum, and that's the same thing that definitely influences my sexuality is there's more than just one label. There's more than just one gender. Um, and so kind of accepting that I don't have to present myself in a certain way. I don't whether it's being super feminine and trying to look really straight, or like wearing rainbow flags every day everywhere I go. You know, if I want to look masculine one day, if I want to look feminine the next, it's okay. And all of those identities are celebrated and unique in their own ways. And I think it's really, really awesome to be able to claim that in more than one way.
Nice. Nice. I wanted to say something on this. I think for me, when I think about how my sexuality is interacting with other of my identities, age comes into play, and educational privilege, white privilege, and to a certain extent, class privilege. When I say that is that I know that I have always been genderqueer, I have always been bisexual and queer, but given that I was born in 1960, I never had words for that. And so I presented as a girl, as a woman, and even though on a personal level, I sometimes got flack for who I am in my gender, on a sort of societal level, people took me at face value as a cisgender woman, and especially for a long time I identified as straight because I had no language, and when I came out as lesbian. And so I have not experienced the type of societal discrimination that a lot in our community experience, and I know it has to do with my white privilege, my education privilege, and my class privilege. I come from a family of teachers. My dad was a professor. My mom taught at the same college as he did. I went to prestigious schools. My first job was teaching at a prep school. And now they did terminate my contract because they said I didn't have the proper Exeter ego, which makes me think they probably knew on some level I was queer. But it did not really influence the sort of progression of my life. I think the most amazing thing that ever happened to me was getting to be hired as the director of the lgbtq+ resource center, because it has really allowed me to not only explore myself personally and who I am, but to learn so much from my students about identities and how they intersect with other identities that they have. And I have just feel so, I'm going to say it, I feel so blessed in being in the position that I am. And especially at my age, so many people at my age never really came to terms with who they are, in a lot of ways, I think. So, wonderful. The next question I want to talk about, I want to talk more about what are some of the sort of the societal challenges that our community faces. What do you see as major challenges that either you or the BiPanPoly community face due to a societal lack of understanding about this sexuality and romantic orientation? Amity, would you start us out on that?
Sure. I was just talking today in my class about the fact that, so often people in the BiPanPoly community are seen as having a lot of privilege compared to lesbian or gay. And that's like what people in the community will say, or how you're often told, well, you can retreat into privilege at any point you want to, right? These are all things that I have heard personally and that we get told. And yet the research shows the opposite. The research shows that bisexual people have more negative outcomes than anyone else. And so I think there's a misunderstanding about what it means for us when we are like how we experience our relationships in particular. So I'm currently in a relationship for the first time after like 7 years of only dating women. I'm currently in a relationship with a cis gender male person. And I am finding myself in that same place again where it's like, you know, you start to feel invisible, you wonder how valid you are in the community, and there's a lot of messages that kind of push that idea that, you know, in order to really be queer, you have to like always be in a very visibly queer relationship. And I think that that particular feeling, that particular message gets is a challenge of our community. It's a challenge to consistently like push for visibility, to consistently be able to see ourselves as valid and to root out like whatever biphobia we have within ourselves. You know, I think for me, I've been on this merry-go-round a few times, you know, where I find myself like, okay, I'm back here again, you know, like, okay, I have a male partner and I need to think about like, how do I continue to validate my bi identity, and how do I continue to like feel queer enough, and how do I continue to do all of that? Because like, I think that it's almost, I almost feel more oppression when I'm in the place that people would say looks like I have privilege, right? Because I feel like I have to fight harder to be seen in so many ways. And so it's I don't know, perhaps this time around I feel a little less challenged by it because I've been there several times, but it always comes up for me. And I think a lot of others maybe experience that as well.
Haley, what do you see?
Some of the major challenges that I see are like stereotypes of just people thinking that one day if we're bi, then we're just gonna all of a sudden be a lesbian, and then we'll choose something, we won't forever be bi. And like the stereotypes that some people are just this sexuality just for like the sexual desire. And then I also think some of the other challenges are like with the dating, kind of like what Amni was saying about just how different it is between dating different genders, how you have to feel like you're seen. I would also say that like careers can be kind of challenging, because I know, I don't remember which one it was, but someone from like Miss America last year came out as like bisexual, and they wouldn't let her do any of the parades or anything, and it's all because she told them. And if she wouldn't have told them, she'd be in the exact same position. And I know that this year, like 2020, one of the first Miss America came out as bisexual, and they were like okay with it this year. I think it was like Miss Utah or something. But I just think we have a long way to go for society to like see it as okay and just make it so we can exist without people discriminating and just being negative towards us.
Alicia.
Yeah. So actually, Haley just touched on something that I definitely find myself stuck in as well. It's like if I'm single or with a male presenting person, it's like even in my careers, I don't want to hide myself, and I almost feel like I have to like push out my queerness further and like, hey, I know it doesn't look like it, but like also like, hey, like hi, like queer, what's up? Like hi, I'm Alicia, I'm queer, you know. And kind of, you know, it really is, it's like pushing that visibility. I think also what comes along with those things, because part of the other half of that question was just you know, visibility in general. And like for myself, all throughout when I was growing up, I knew of straight and I knew gay men. And I only knew about gay men because of the show Will and Grace. My mom said that show is bad because it has a gay man in it. Didn't know anything else. Like, it's embarrassing, but literally until my senior year of high school, mind you, I'm 24 years old. My senior year of high school was the first time that I heard the word lesbian. And that was like mind-boggling to me, let alone later on understand. And I went to public school too. Like, it's not like I was sheltered or anything. But later on understanding the terms of bisexual, and then later on, furthermore, polyamory, polysexual, polyromantic, pansexual, all these other identities, got a little overwhelming at first, but then after that, it's just the visibility and the fact that there are words for it. And there's words because it's common enough and recognized enough, not enough, but somewhat, to actually feel validated. And a lot of people, will go back and forth. Should we have more terms or less terms? And it's like, I'm all for umbrella terms for people that don't want to educate themselves to just know something, and you can't hide yourself from it. But the more terms, it just makes you feel more like, A, you're not alone, and B, if there's a word for it, it's that validation instantly. And lastly, tying into just general social media, like I still think about, I can't remember what celebrity it was. It was my freshman year of college, but it was like this bisexual woman got married to a man, and the queer community was like out with her, and they're like, you betrayed the community, and getting married and all this other stuff. And it was right before same-sex marriage was legalized. And I remember looking at that like, yeah, like they did betray, like how dare she do that? And now I'm like, okay, well, whenever I judge, I somehow become that thing. I don't know. So it's like a check on myself, but also just like, you're not betraying anyone by being yourself unapologetically. So reflecting on those things and using social media just as much as a way to combat those biphobia, or all the other phobias, along with that, of knowing that you can raise awareness just as much. But also, you don't have to put the disclaimer of, and I'm still teaching this to myself, but I don't need to always put the disclaimer of, also, by the way, I'm queer. Because it's a privilege to have someone share their identity with you. And that's definitely something, if you want to raise awareness on social media and be proud of it, that's awesome. But it's also like, your identity, just like anything else, is sacred, and it should be treated as such, because not everyone's lucky to know about the terms that you choose, or that I choose, and the things that go along with that, and the uniqueness and the beauty that tie in along with those things.
Victor?
That's a hard act to follow. But yeah, I'm in very much agreement with what's been said so far. There are some things that have how should I come out as a part of the discussion. One of the things that I've been struck by is, and this relates back to things that people have already said, that we tend to infer people's sexual orientation, their romantic orientation, from who they're with, right? And so when I've talked about this in front of classes and elsewhere, one of the things that would come up is, well, if you see two people who appear to be of the same gender, what do you assume they are? And generally speaking, the answer is people assume that they're gay, right? Or lesbian. And if they appear to be of different genders, then the assumption is that they're straight, which means that, well, how does someone bisexual, pansexual, polysexual, how do they get seen, right? And yeah, especially when there's this bias towards being in coupled relationships, two people, when you might have more people that you are connected to. I mean, I'm polyamorous and have been so happily most of my, in fact, probably about as long as I've been out as bi. And I like having, in fact, not only like, it is a necessary part of my life that I have the ability to have more than just one meaningful relationship in my life. It's a challenge that I end up facing is how do I get all of my parts seen without having to go through what Alicia was talking about. And it's like, oh yeah, and here I'm going to come out again and again, and it's tiring. It's really tiring to have to do that all the time, just so that people don't make mistakes or make wrong assumptions about me. So yeah.
So we've seen some of the challenges the community face. I want to switch the conversation to activism at this point, ways that we kind of confront those challenges. And it's a broad term, right? There's so many ways that people can do activism. And I wanted to know, maybe starting on a personal level, what as sort of an individual, what you do, how we are acting in ways that advance an understanding of our community that challenge misconceptions. Haley, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I would say some ways that I help would just be like within community building. So if I have a friend who I like come out to and they have questions about it, I'll definitely answer them or give them something so they can learn more about it. I also feel like another big part of it is people who are in the closet or don't quite know what type of identity they want to identify with, just helping them on the path to finding ways that they can figure it out, even if they don't want to come out right away. I feel like that's a big way that we can help because it'll bring us more people who identify like us, and it'll become more, instead of like a stereotype, it'll just become more common.
Alicia?
So she has a very similar answer to what I was planning on saying, but just I think in a way, the smallest but the most rippling forms of activism is being yourself, and when able to have those conversations with the people around you. I know that it's so easy with how much information is scattered around online and everything to get kind of caught up, and to have that personal one-on-one conversation with people who are genuinely curious when you feel like you're in a safe space to talk about those things can ripple a lot farther than what a lot of people think. And everyone is watching everyone, and that can be scary, but at the same time I think it's liberating to know that everything that I do can be seen by someone else as an example. Or if I make mistakes, that's still an example. They can learn from those things just as much. You don't have to be the pride star of everything, because we learn from failures just as much as we do the good things. So yeah, I think the smallest forms, but also with big impact, for just ourselves, but also just general activism. I think that there's just a lot of, I feel like social media just has on my mind lately because of COVID. Oh well, I would say parades or different like speakers or different outreach programs, but right now I'm just like, oh yeah, social media is how you're an activist now, which in a way though is very beautiful because we all have that opportunity and people can watch and people can act on it, but Yeah.
Victor?
Hmm. Um, yeah, a lot of my activism has been through expressing who I am, and that's been a part of my life for a long time. More recently, my long-term partner and I have ended up adopting someone. We have fallen through the trapdoor into parenthood because our adopted person is, well, they came to us when they were 19 and were coming out of a very, very unaccepting religious household and identified as LGBTQ and later identified as gender non-binary. And if you had asked me 4 years ago when we did this, uh, what my understanding was of gender and these issues, and I've studied this stuff, right? Graduate level study, I would have said, well, I know some things, right? And it's been utterly mind-blowing to now be in this position of being a parent to someone for whom their gender identity is not fitting that. And I just want to say it's been interesting because the activism for me has been to be there as a parent, right? In a way that I had not at all ever expected, and to provide uh, a family and a home and a welcoming environment for someone who was not getting that in their family of origin. So I don't need a gold star, but I have to say that I have learned so much about how to do these things from having had that experience. So that's my current activism adventure. There you go.
Mhm. I guess that makes it my turn. It's an interesting question because I know you're asking now on a personal level, and then you're going to move to the more institutional level. And I really was trying to sit here. I think when I read the questions ahead of time, I didn't read them carefully. And so now I'm trying to actually pull those two pieces apart, and I'm not certain that I can. I think what I have come to realize recently is that the majority of my activism is education. And it is like both Alicia and Haley talked about, being myself. Victor also talked about, being myself and, not just educating others about my identity personally, but also like being an example for others. I think as a counselor educator, as someone with a PhD, being in that classroom and being able to be visible in the classroom, I think that is both a personal level activism, but also an institutional activism. And so that's where I don't feel I can totally pull these things apart. As a counselor educator, a huge part of my job is to help to raise up a generation of counselors who are advocates for their clients and who are able to serve all of their clients. And so both in the education of who are these people that you're going to see in the world, which includes BiPanPoly people, and making sure that students have a good education about how to provide those services, but also how to advocate within their communities, how to speak up, how to do those things. And in order to teach that, I have to do that too. So when I do hear things in the classroom or see things that are inaccurate, it is my job to kind of challenge those things. And I think that a large majority of what I do, and maybe I'll save the other things that I do for the other question, maybe not quite breaking them up as you asked, but I think a large majority of what I do is education, both on the university campus in my classrooms and then out in the community as well. Yeah.
So of course, now we are moving to the how have you contributed to activism on an institutional or an organizational level? And we'll let Victor start with this one.
Oh, and did you want me to start talking a little bit about BiNet from oh so long ago?
Yeah.
Okay. So BiNet USA, an organization that has recently been in the LGBTQ plus news, I'll come back to that, got started back in the 1990s, but in 1990, as the North American Multicultural Bisexual Network. And then it was founded very idealistically and I think very appropriately as an organization to advocate on behalf of people who were bisexual. And at that time, bisexual would have been more of a, understood to be an inclusive term for everything that we now think of bi, pan, polysexual. And very much so because of the Bisexual Manifesto that was printed in Anything That Moves, the magazine that was produced at that time. And over the past 30 years, BiNet USA, along with the Bisexual Resource Center, and with the American Institute of Bisexuality, they have been the three main organizations, and there's that have been advocating for BiPanPoly people over that time. But one of the things I want to say is that it's been a little unusual because there are so many other organizations that have been formed for representing gay men, for representing lesbian women, for representing transgender people. It's been a little weird to me over time to see so little organized advocacy in that sense. And I think it's been a problem because a lot of people who are bisexual or BiPanPolysexual activists have been asked to kind of show their loyalties for working with larger organizations and in turn haven't had their identities validated. When I was invited as a guest to the White House in 2015, 2016, I was there 3 years in a row for various reasons. We met, there was a one-day sort of mini conference that took place in the first floor meeting rooms of AD, Human Rights Campaign. And there were people who, were more recent activists who were saying, gosh, isn't it nice that HRC has done this? And for some of us who had been around longer, it was like, they should have done this like 20, 25 years ago, right? So we're in this interesting position of where we now have recognition that there's so many people who are out there who identify as bi, pan, polysexual, asexual, aromantic. There's so much more room to recognize people's identities, but the organizations that we have are, still playing catch up. So that's kind of anything else I'd be going into way more detail, but I figured that that's not a bad place to sort of leave it for right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Did you want to more, Victor?
We can come back to this part of the discussion.
Yeah. I guess that the piece that I didn't talk about much is just the piece of always kind of looking around and seeing, like, in the place I work, in the community I live in, like what barriers are in place, what things need to change to improve the climate, what can we do here right now. And so I think in addition to like the education piece, which I think can be institutional for sure, as well as personal, there's also kind of the seeking change piece. And I think a lot of times one of the biggest one of the biggest things happens maybe as people seek out consultation about how to make that change within their workplace too. So being able to kind of guide and help others that reach out is also a big part of that. And I think that for a minute, this question was really hard for me to answer. And I think I do want to say something, which is that, like, I feel personally that the large majority of the BiPanPoly activism I have done has been actually larger, like umbrella LGBT activism. I don't know that I can personally claim that I have spent a lot of time and energy specifically in our community working on these issues. It has increased for me in the last couple of years with there's a group on campus that I'm sure Liz will talk about, our BiPanPoly support group, not called a support group, whatever you call it. I don't know. Anyway, it's supportive. And I think just being a part of that and being able to actually connect with people just in the identity has been big. But the first time that I ever did that was actually with Liz and Victor in our BiPanPoly Speakers Bureau, where we were gonna and did a little bit of speaking across Wisconsin. But I remember I had a kind of a big crisis of internalized biphobia that I figured out because I was suddenly just focused on my own identity, and I had never done that. And I think I didn't realize how much of me felt like I didn't deserve that in some way, or that I wasn't like valid as a queer person if I only focused on bi people. So that has been a huge like personal learning for me, is that like, yes, I need to do that activism too, and it is okay to just focus on BiPanPoly people, because I really think that I kind of came up in it looking at the umbrella as though the only way I can be valid under here is if I focus on all of you who aren't me, you know, and so that's been a piece of my own personal journey that I've hopefully am helping to have others also challenge if they bump into that.
Haley?
As of activism, like on an organization level, I don't feel like I've had a lot of experience with that yet. I really want to, but I think one of the big things that has helped, like with just people on campus, is being able to just like listen to people and listen to what they're telling me and their stories. I just feel like that helps a lot to like make them feel valid in their like own emotions. And even though that's a small part of the organization, I feel like that'll kind of be a ripple effect, because if they're doing okay from me listening to them, then they can be doing okay for someone else that they can help them.
And don't forget that as part of the BiPanPoly discussion group, being on this panel is your first step into larger activism. So thank you. Alicia.
Yeah, I think that I've had a mixture, kind of like what Amity said, of more LGBTQ plus umbrella activism, and I'm trying to work more specifically in a BiPanPoly atmosphere of being intentional with what I am able to participate in and build platforms for and step on platforms in certain situations. But I think also I have a lot of future activism planned. Like I'm going to continue my education, and I know that I'll be getting my master's in tribal governance, but ideally I'd love to get a doctorate in some kind of LGBTQ studies, women's studies, and eventually be a professor. But it's that kind of mindset. I mean, who knows? Maybe I won't even get to the doctorate moment, but like if I have my goals aligned in that kind of way of, you know, sharing knowledge, attaining knowledge, always be willing to learn. Those are my greatest strengths in being an activist. But also even the small things. I mean, literally everyone that's watching this right now, whether or not they're intending to be, they're being an activist. Um, and I think that that's something already very special. And then just kind of, you know, be intentional with that mindset of, I don't know if I'll necessarily end up at that goal, but I know that if I'm in that realm, then I'm doing the right thing.
Victor, did you want to add to the conversation?
Uh, Actually, I'm kind of interested in knowing what questions people have. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways we could talk about this, but I agree with everything that everyone's been saying so far. It's been really good to hear.
Wonderful. So we are going to move to questions for our panelists now, but before we do that, I want to tell you about the BiPanPoly discussion group, because with my brain at this moment, I might forget at the end. This is a group that we've had on campus, I want to say 3, maybe even 4 years now. And this semester we're meeting twice a month. We're meeting one Tuesday a month at 2 p.m. and one Monday a month at 6:30 p.m. To get the exact dates and the link for those meetings, you would just want to email either me, Cannon, at uwosh.edu, or the LGBTQ Resource Center. Or just go to our website and you can get directed to that. The group is specifically for those who identify as BiPan, poly, queer, or those who are questioning and would like to come and discuss more of these issues that we have been talking about tonight. So now, the really exciting part of the evening for us, what questions do you all have? And again, you can write them in the chat. You can just start speaking. You can raise your hand. I'd like to know what you're thinking about. Or if anybody has something they would like to add to the conversation, please do that as well.
Don't be shy.
No. We have a question. This may sound, there are no dumb questions. There just aren't. So, what is the difference between polysexual and pansexual? I tried to look it up and it said there were some synonyms.
I could answer that.
Okay.
If you'd like. So typically, I think first of all, any of the identities under the BiPanPoly umbrella and any of the other words that people use, omnisexual, you know, whatever it might be, all are defined by the individuals who hold those identities, and they may be slightly different than the definitions that I might share with you. But in general, when you read about these, when people talk about pansexual, it's most often identified as people who are attracted to people regardless of gender, or who are attracted to all genders. Whereas polysexual people tend to define it more as attracted to multiple, but not necessarily all genders. And gender is more a part of how the person experiences attraction. Typically speaking, though, both pan and polysexual fit under an umbrella with bisexual as well, because you're talking about people who are attracted to people of multiple different genders. So there is like that synonym part to it that is very accurate, but then there's some nuance to how people will define it.
I want to bleep in and add a little bit to that. And Quill's got a great question, which we should come back to, but let me add to what Amni said. One of the things that's also worth pointing out is that there's a lot of misdefinitions that go on around all of these terms. And Robin Oakes, who has been a speaker on BiPan poly issues on sexuality for a long time, she has been working with Merriam-Webster in order to get a better online definition of bisexual. And so when we see things like, looking it up and finding out that there is that there's synonyms, so it's like, well, like Amity said, there's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of nuance, and that needs to be understood better than the way we have it right now, where and this could I go on to Sarah's question for a moment here? Is that okay?
I think that's an important one to jump to, and then
Yeah,
jump back up.
but I don't want to forget Quills and Alexis. One of the things about bisexuality being transphobic, well, here's a way that this comes up for me. When I first came out as bisexual, one of the things that I would run into from people who were mostly gay or lesbian, that I would hear this from, and they would look at me and they would say, well, you're only bisexual if you're exactly 50-50 defined in your attractions. That, if you're even one bit 51-49, well, then you're either gay or you're straight. Which was kind of like, great, thanks for defining me. That really helped not. And yeah, so when I hear people talk about bisexuality being transphobic, I've never encountered that. All of my activism that I've run across has been in concert with a lot of trans people who also, many of whom identify as bisexual. And the only place that I've heard it more recently is that there have been some people in the pansexual community who have ended up saying that pansexual is attracted to everyone, but bisexual is attracted only to genders. And it's like, I'm totally down with you defining for yourself who you are. Please don't misdefine anybody else. And that goes the other way when I occasionally run across bisexual people say, well, pansexuality is just the same thing as bisexuality. We don't need an extra term. And I'm kind of like, we have so much in common. Let people find for themselves, like Amy said. So anyway, I'm about to take off my shoe and start pounding the table, and I should stop. So
I would like to add that a lot of times that suggestion that bisexuality is transphobic comes from older definition of bisexual as being attracted to only two genders, to men and to women. And of course, even if we look at that, we can be attracted to both cisgender and transgender men and women, not transphobic there. But forgetting that many of us who use the term bi have used a broader definition. We still think about two, but we think about sort of two as two sets. I'm attracted to genders like my own, and I'm attracted to genders different than my own. And so because most of us use a broader definition, that's another reason why the term itself isn't transphobic.
And I want to just, sorry, Liz, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to add in, I think that the reason that gets continually talked about is because language is evolving always, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we first started talking about these terms, bisexuality was the first term, and the language was very binary at that time. That didn't mean that people didn't practice, trans-inclusive loving, if you want to put it that way. It just meant there wasn't language to encompass it. And so you see language began to develop, evolve, and challenge the binary nature of how we understood bisexuality. And, terms like pansexuality were intentionally developed to kind of be more inclusive of trans identities, but bisexuality also, shifted to be more inclusive, to go to the definition that Liz is talking about. And so I think it is important to say, that question doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of the idea that, some people do still misdefine it in that way because they haven't kept up with how language has evolved. we should address maybe some of these other questions.
Yeah, and I'm going to go ahead and read them out loud so
Yeah.
I'm recording it. But going back to Quill's question, is it difficult to be in a long-term relationship if your attraction shifts around a lot?
I can speak on that.
Maybe, yeah, please.
So I used to relationship hop quite often because so I used to relationship hop quite often and felt like because my sexuality was changing, then I had to change partners too, and that's part of coming to terms with who you are. But as I got older, I realized that I prefer my partner, whoever I'm with, and everything else is just external. If your sexuality is changing, that's not going to necessarily, or at least in my case, it's not going to impact how you see your partner. You're either wanting to be with your partner or you aren't. And if your sexuality is changing outside of that, that's one thing. But it also just comes down to, are you happy with your partner? Because even as I feel like, you could do the typical gender scale of like 90% female and only 10% male, and you can do all those scales and things, but when it comes down to it, even those percentages, as they change, if you're with your partner, you're with your partner. So at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily change as long as you have eyes for the person that you're with.
Can I add a couple things? I think one thing that's really important is to recognize that there are a lot of people in our community who are polyamorous, which does address perhaps that the ways that a person experiences attraction towards different genders at different times, and what kinds of things are acceptable within their relationship and that are consented upon within their relationship, may allow for some fluidity within that for people that question, like perhaps that, may want to leave a relationship because they have some other attraction forming or whatnot. However, I guess I want to say a couple of things about this. It's an interesting thing because there is a difference between like being poly and cheating, and I think that we get accused of cheating because we have a lot of because we have the ability to have attraction towards multiple people, and people think, well, you can't ever be satisfied and you're going to eventually like leave me for this other gender because you're not going to want to stay with one gender. And that's just inaccurate, and I think that just as there are people who are heterosexual who are cheaters, there are people who are bi who are cheaters too, right? But that does not necessarily have anything to do with how we experience attraction. It's more about like your personal codes of ethics of how you behave in the world. And so I don't know how I wanted to say this, but I guess I just want to say that having those attractions doesn't necessarily mean you're going to like leave a partner or do something else. And there's a lot of ways that we deal with and I want to say this is true of all relationships. I think that it's fair to assume that some people are perhaps more naturally inclined towards monogamy, perhaps like when Alicia was talking about, if you have eyes for your partner, like when you love someone, that's the person you want to be with, and that's how it goes for you. And if you're poly, perhaps you're more expansive than that. It might be for more than one person, and that's okay too. But I think I was trying to go somewhere and I'm losing it a little bit. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe somebody else can pick up. But I'm trying to I'm trying to highlight that. Oh, I know what I was going to say. That like there are a lot of ways that we maybe deal with how we feel attraction. Like, sometimes people experience attraction to movie stars, or perhaps there are a lot of like ways we incorporate fantasy into sexual practices. There's a lot of things that I don't think it's so cut and dry as just like you're either attracted to this gender and that's your partner or not, you know? And I guess I just want to say it can be bigger than that. I don't know.
Anyone else want to address that question?
I have one thought, but I also want to make room for if Haley wants to add anything here too.
I'm not hearing you, Haley.
Oh, sorry. I don't really have anything to add. I think you guys got it pretty well.
Okay, cool.
Well, the only thing I would then add to all of that is that actually I think I found it easier when I recognize that I have many different kinds of attractions and have the ability to be in more than one relationship. It doesn't put so much pressure on my now long-term partner to be everything to me. And we feel like that's actually a benefit because we can recognize these attractions and figure out how we build support amongst the different people that we're involved with.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to go on to Lux's question. How does your sexual and gender identities influence the style of romantic relationships you have with others and navigate through our heteronormative society?
Does anyone want to go first? I can go first again, but I just want to make sure.
Please do.
Go for it.
So the question being, oh, sorry, technical problems. Influence the style of romantic relationships. I feel like for me, the style of romantic relationship is just understanding that we're always growing and adapting. And for me in particular, my romantic relationships, the only thing that is really impacted is if I happen to be with a cis man, that they understand my identity, the LGBTQ culture, and definitely be willing to immerse themselves as an ally as best that they can. That definitely does impact like my romantic life because of, you know, heteronormacy and literally that is the patriarchy, understanding different privileges that come with that, and how that those things can't be erased when I'm with that kind of partner. But also the same thing, it's both ways. When I've been with my previous partner, there was many times where we just had to discuss, like, just because we're in a lesbian presenting relationship, that doesn't mean that either of our bisexuality identities are erased by this. So kind of combating that, and honestly, you can fight the patriarchy regardless of your relationship status and what's heteronormative, but just making sure that you or your partner and your partners are aware and can at least keep up with the terminology to some degree that makes you feel seen and heard, and that they can contribute to the conversation just as much as they can listen and learn.
Anyone else want to add to that one?
I thought that was great.
Yeah, nicely done.
Mhm.
So from Olivia, how accepting were each of your environments when it came to coming out in your sexuality in general? Are there family members or friends that you avoid now because there were issues having to do with you and you showing your true self?
Mm-hmm. I can go. When I first came out, I came out to my friend group first, which were actually members in the LGBTQ community. So I came out within the community before I came out outside of it. And I actually experienced a lot of biphobia when I came out. I didn't really understand it at the time. Like, I think that at the time I was just trying to figure it all out myself, and I didn't necessarily see it as biphobia. But I had friends who said, like, I needed to break up with the girl I was dating because I was just going to hurt her because I was confused about who I was. I had friends who said, I'm just going to think of you as a lesbian. I can't really imagine you with men anyway. And like, in that sense, I acted on both of those things. I did break up with the girl because I didn't, I felt bad or something for it, and that wasn't good. And then we got back together, and then they talked me into breaking up again, and we got back together. And, you know, like, there was this pool that was going on, and it was this, you know, really bad influence of the biphobia. And then the friends who like thought of me as lesbian, I felt like, oh, great, I feel included, you know. And it wasn't until later that I really understood the impact of all of that stuff, because I wasn't being included. I was only being seen as like part of who I was. And I'm actually not friends with the person who told me to break up with that person anymore, because their biphobia continued to manifest in our friendship to the point where my last partner and I, when we first started seeing each other, they were warning the person against me because I was like apparently going to break their heart. P.S. That relationship ended when that person cheated on me and and broke my heart. So it went the other way around, which I felt like slightly justified in being like, see, it wasn't me. And yeah, so yes, that relationship though, that friendship ended. And then I had other people who were supportive. Some of my straight friends were some of the more supportive people, but I also had a few people in the LGBTQ community who were pretty supportive and open to seeing me. My family did not respond very supportively. I got some Bible verses, and there's a lot of silence in my family. And when I see my mom, she says things like, I pray every day you'll find a husband. So it didn't quite go very well, but I'm still connected to them.
So we're nearing the end of our time. In the minute that's left, I wonder, we have one more question. If somebody could address it, that would be fantastic. Why do some view those who are bi-curious as offensive?
I could take it, but I'm happy to let somebody else take a stab at it too.
Go.
I think the biggest thing about it is simply that bi-curious seems like it's experimentation rather than accepting of oneself. And there's a certain, I think the biggest problem is that saying that you're bi-curious is, rather than recognizing that someone's maybe coming out and recognizing that they don't have to be in a closet, that it's seen as being like, oh, well, you just want to be in the closet, you don't really want to accept who you are. And I think we should probably do a lot more to recognize that there are people who are questioning their sexual orientation. They haven't figured it out. And if somebody says that they're bi-curious, well, so long as that doesn't result later in, you know, negative attitudes, that's great. And we should let people figure out who they are. And if sexuality is fluid, you know, bi-curious is probably a real thing. There you go.
Thanks.
Yeah, in fact, actually, I'd much rather see people being bi-curious than feeling like, oh my God, I can't figure that out, and I'm not gonna touch it. But, no.
I don't know if this is accurate, but one of the main contexts I hear that word used in is in BDSM communities. I hear it more there than I do in other spaces, and I just kind of wonder if, like, instead of the term questioning, sometimes that term comes to the top, perhaps in that community more than other communities. But I don't know. I haven't done a study to see if that's accurate or if it's just my experience. So I don't know, maybe others have insight,
Wonderful.
but I don't think it's offensive either.
Yeah, I was gonna add something very similar. Is I think a lot of people don't realize that the LGBTQ, the Q is for queer, but it's also questioning, and a term. I feel like that one's more widely because there's more generalness to it. Bi-curious, I think it also stems not just the communities that necessarily particularly use it, but also going back to the whole biphobia thing of, oh, so you're just going to try the oppressive side for a minute? And, you know, people get like angry at that because it's like people are fighting, like, this is, you know, love is not a choice, and now you're saying you're curious about it. And it's like, but at the same time, once again, you know, all of us are speaking from our personal perspectives and stories, and it's just, for me, I've never seen anything wrong with being bi-curious because it just shows that you're open and you're trying to be your best fluid self. But that's to kind of more answer the question. I feel like it's just, it stems in that whole kind of biphobia, or just feeling like someone can choose their sexuality, but there's so much more than just a label, as I'm sure many of us know or coming to know. There's so much more than just the sticker.
Wonderful. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our evening. I did want to say that if people have more questions about terminology and about some of the experiences within the community, we are offering a safe training for students on Sunday, the 27th, from 6 to 9 p.m. If you go to the LGBTQ+ Resource Center website, you can register for that training. There will be two SAFE trainings throughout the semester, and one what we call T-SAFE trainings, which looks more at transgender identities. There are also other programs that we're doing for the Resource Center. We hope you join us for other programs. We're going to end the program here by thanking our 4 panel members. You did an amazing job, and cannot thank you enough. And if anybody has any questions, we can stick around for just a little bit, but I'm going to stop the recording and we're going to end the initial part of our program. So thank you, everybody.